All right, guys, it'll be the first week, day one notes. We're going to call it Road to Revolution. In class this week, we're going to talk a lot about the colonial region and what's going on in the colonies in the late 1600s, early 1700s. And eventually, what's going on in the colonies is going to lead to a lot of tension between England and its colonists, which will lead to a revolution and into America fighting for freedom. One of the most famous pictures from the Revolutionary War is going to be the snake here. It says join or die. And you notice that it's listing a lot of the actual colonies at the time, and it's the idea that if these colonies do not come together during this war, that there's no way that they could separate from England. You know, the idea of, you either be all together or none at that point. Okay, so the first slide here, we're going to talk about colonial governors and colonial legislators. Colonial governors are going to be elected by the King of England. These are going to be governors that will be over colonies. So, for instance, Maryland would have its own governor. New England and so forth, kind of like we do today with our states. But the biggest thing, again, these governors are elected by the king, so they're going to be doing what the king wants. On the other hand, you're going to have people in the colonies practicing self-government, and they're going to elect their own people, and these are going to be called colonial legislators. And these colonial legislators tend to be rich, influential people, kind of similar today, like the House of Representatives and the Senate. You know, most of those people tend to have money today. And very often, these two sides butted heads, and there's a lot of tension between them because you have colonial legislators which are trying to do what the people want, and then colonial governors trying to do what the king wants. There are some instances where colonial governors and even some tax collectors will end up being tarred and feathered, which you have a picture over here. Being tarred and feathered is the idea that literally they take tar, sometimes hot, they pour it on you and they roll you around in feathers. It's almost as an embarrassment, so you stick out, meaning you've done something that's not approved by many people at that time. And this, again, this governors versus legislators is just one instance of it's not a major tension between the two. You're not going to have war because of this instance, but all the stuff when we talk about it's a step ladder to actual revolution. Things are going to build from here and move forward. Next, we're going to have mercantilism. Britain's going to practice mercantilism. This is where England used the colonies to export more goods than they import. When you're doing that, you're going to be selling more goods than you're buying. The idea you're making a profit. Okay? And under mercantilism, they're going to use the colonies for raw materials and markets. So you can see here you got things like raw materials like tobacco, cotton, iron, and so forth. They're going to be sent to England, and then England will manufacture those. Like in the tobacco, they might make cigars or iron or even wood. They might make a chair or a desk, and then they're going to send it back to the colonies to be sold. They won't allow these goods to be actually manufactured in the colonies. They want the raw materials sent to England so English manufacturers can produce them, and then English businesses could then make a profit off selling those goods back to the colonies. To help maintain mercantilism, England's going to pass what's called the Navigation Acts. Navigation Act said you only allow the colonies to sell certain goods to England. That means the colonies could not sell goods to other colonies, like if something from South Carolina couldn't be sold to Massachusetts, or more importantly, you could not sell those certain goods to other countries. Okay? So if you were a tobacco farmer in South Carolina, you could only sell that tobacco to England, not any place else in the world. And if you think of it from a business standpoint, this will frustrate colonists because you're telling them who and who they cannot do business with. It's limiting your ability to make money. You know, I always use the example in class. Imagine if Aner McDonald's could only sell goods or only sell food to people from Aner. Yes, Aner McDonald's would do okay, but the problem is Aner McDonald's makes its most money selling to tourists coming to and from the beach. That's an idea of a Navigation Act. You know, if you only allow them to sell certain goods to a certain part or certain people. And like we say here in the note, it says limited business opportunities for merchants. So of course people are going to be upset because you're limiting their ability to make money. Next, to help enforce Navigation Acts to keep England making that money, a couple of things are going to be passed. You're going to have the writs of assistance. This is where Britain could search homes or ships whenever they wanted. They basically come in your house, search your belongings, search your home, your business, or even if you had a ship, and they will be looking for goods you're not supposed to have. Again, you're only supposed to be buying and selling goods from England certain goods, and if you had certain goods from, say, France or Spain or another country, they could confiscate them. Okay, the idea you were taking away your privacy. Nowadays, you have the right of privacy. If a police officer came to your house without a search warrant, you could say, no, you can't come in. Okay, but back then, they could have a warrant for any reason to come and search your stuff. Okay. Next thing they had, they passed what's called the Quartering Act. Colonists would have to house a British soldier. So think about that. Imagine today you had to keep a soldier or police officer in your home. Some of you might have families of soldier police officers, but that's different than having the government say you must house a soldier in your home. And right here, this picture kind of shows it. You got the British soldier having a good time, and then the family kind of looking at him, wondering what's going on. The problem with these, again, you're taking away what the EOC likes to call civil liberties. Your individual freedoms and your privacy. Okay, because you're not having privacy because they're forcing these soldiers to come in your home and search all your stuff, which isn't good. Okay? So again, if you think about it now, the mercantilism is limiting who you can do business with. Writs of assistance and Quartering Act are limiting your privacy. So now you're just building and building on things you can and cannot do in the colonies, and it's being limited by England. It's going to start frustrating colonists. In the mid 18th century, you're going to have a very famous war called the French and Indian War. This is between 1754 and 1763. The war is going to be fought between British on one side against the French and Native Americans on the other side. France had a good relationship with Native Americans because of their trading policy, and they tended to try to have good relationships with them. Britain tended to not have great relationships with them, and so that's why Native Americans will side with the French. We don't need to know a lot about this war in particular just for class, but we do need to know that Britain does win, and because of this win, they're going to gain all the land east of the Mississippi River. So if you see this dark red on the map here, this is the colonies before this war. You notice how it doesn't really go, you're talking about the Appalachian Mountains being the western boundary. People don't settle west of this landmass, this geographic feature. And after this war, Britain now controls pretty much all of this in the pink and dark red. This is the Mississippi River right here, kind of found in my arrow here. And so there's a lot of land to be had, which people will be excited. But Britain's going to do a couple things after this war, which again is going to frustrate colonists. The first, they're going to start taxing the colonies to pay for the war debt. The wars are expensive. We'll say wars cost two things: money and lives. Britain has to spend a lot of money defending the colonies from France and Native Americans. So they're going to ask the colonies to help pay for this war effort, which seems to make sense. But you got to realize the colonies are not used to paying a lot of taxes. They actually only pay about 25% of the taxes that most people in England do. The reason for that is because England was getting rich off the colonies. They didn't really want to, rock the boat in this situation. So they let the colonies do pretty much kind of do what they wanted. It's a term called salutary neglect, and we'll talk about later. Right? So an example of these taxes, the Stamp Act, a tax on printed material, Sugar Act. There's a ton of other acts, the Tea Act. All these things are going to start taxing goods to help try to pay for this war. So, people, especially Americans, even today, we don't like taxes. So when you start increasing these taxes, you're going to have a lot of people get very frustrated. And also, after the war, they're going to pass what's called the Proclamation of 1763. Not a coincidence, war ends in 1763, and this proclamation is passed in 1763. And this is where colonists could not settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. This is that line between that dark red and light red or pink. That is the Appalachian Mountains. And the reason for this is that the British just fought the war to protect colonists. If colonists keep pushing into this new open area like the Ohio River Valley, which would be in this area right here, there's going to be more problems with Native Americans, which then would lead to Britain having to spend more money to protect the colonists. To prevent that, they passed this proclamation line. They're going to force British colonists who are settling in this area back towards the coast. Imagine living in Ainhurst. A police officer came to you one day and said, "Hey, you're too far from the coast. You got to go live in Myrtle Beach area." That would frustrate you. So again, we're talking about the road of revolution, these steps that are occurring. So we have the first step, mercantilism, limiting and navigation acts, limiting to who you can sell with, limiting your business. Then you have Writs of Citizen Quartering Act, which is limiting your civil liberties or your privacy. Now you have increased taxes, and then they're basically telling you where you can and where you cannot live within reason. And as you add these things up, if you're kind of creating that stepping stone to war, and eventually events are gonna happen where all this tension is gonna build up and overflow, and we're gonna actually start fighting a war. Okay. And that's going to be it for the first one. Again, look for the second one. We're going to do a lot of notes like this year. As long as you're paying attention, this is going to be turned into an ed puzzle, and you'll be able to answer those questions just off of this. Again, I hope you're taking these notes. You want to get these down in your notes because we're going to use this stuff in class. All right, thank you guys, and I hope you have a good one.